Hey everyone, welcome back to the RTS podcast. Today I've got a guest with me. We're going to be talking to Coach Jeremy Hartman. Now, a lot of you probably know Jeremy, but for those that don't, Coach Hartman is a powerlifting coach. He's been a powerlifter himself. And the thing that I want you to know about him before we really get the ball rolling, and I'll let him kind of dig a little bit more into his background, is that he's produced three IPF world level lifters in a very short amount of time from basically scratch, from the first time that they've touched a barbell to IPF level achievements, world level achievements. And I wanted to talk with him more about the training methods that he teaches, what he's learned over his competitive career. As I mentioned in the podcast, he and I go pretty far back, competitively speaking. We competed together on some junior world teams and into the open divisions and things like that. So we go pretty far back, and I think that he's got a lot to offer in terms of coaching. We cover things like his background, the lifters that have had success working in his program, how he goes about spotting talent, um, what their training is like, things that he's learned over the course of his competitive career, who his biggest influences were, so kind of who he's learned from over the years, and then toward the end we get into a really good discussion on kind of differences of opinion between he and I in terms of training and how we see the training process playing out, and kind of how our own methods have evolved over the years. So it was a really good discussion, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. Before I bring you the full podcast, I do just want to mention that we're having registrations now for RTS Classroom. So if you like stuff like this conversation and you want to get a lot more in depth in terms of learning about training techniques and training planning and programming and technical proficiency, and you like getting into the details of all that stuff, maybe you're a coach or maybe you're coaching yourself, I would really encourage you to check out RTS Classroom. I'm teaching a class. Jeremy Hartman's teaching a class. We've got Rory Alter teaching a class on technical mastery. We've got classes on coaching skills development. Blaine Sumner's teaching a class. So there's a bunch of different classes. And I'm sure that there's something that you would find very interesting in a bunch of these different classes. So if that's something that you think that you'd like, please go to store.reactivetrainingsystems.com and click on Classroom. There you'll see a list of all of our classes. You'll be able to get full course schedules, registration information, and anything else. And if you've got any questions about this stuff in particular, feel free to reach out and contact me. I'm pretty easy to get a hold of in the social media age. Facebook, Instagram, email still works, believe it or not. But any of those options are fine in terms of reaching out to me and getting your questions answered. But RTS Classroom, again, it allows us to get into a lot more depth than you can get in a seminar or an article series or something like that. So please check that out. I think you'll really enjoy it. And without any further delay, here's Coach Jeremy Hartman.
Reactive Training Systems.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the RTS podcast. I'm talking to you today with Coach Jeremy Hartman. Me and Jeremy go back quite a long ways at this point, but Jeremy, for anybody who doesn't know you or doesn't know about your background, you want to kind of fill us in on who you are, what you've done, and what you're up to these days.
Yeah. I was very fortunate to have a coach start me off with strength conditioning when I was real young in middle school, and it changed my entire sports. And I was so fascinated with the strength conditioning and the confidence, the athleticism, just kind of the overall package it brought to me that I knew I wanted to take it to the next level. And I kind of got in powerlifting by accident. One of my old wrestling coaches was a competitive lifter, and we kind of started the journey with USA Powerlifting. From there, I won a teenage national title and best lifter award. Then I won 4 consecutive collegiate and junior national championships, collegiate best lifter award as well. Went into 2 open divisions, finished second one year to world-class lifter Jason Beck, then won an open national title myself. I was very fortunate to compete on the GNC Pro Deadlift stage at the Arnold Classic. So twice there, I was fourth all around. They did it by Wilks formula. I've been to 4 different countries to lift weights. Mike, you and I have pretty much been on the same world teams for that. I think the only difference was maybe 2003 in Poland. So I was very fortunate to do that. And then obviously the pinnacle of our sports is competing at the World Games, which comes after the World Championships. I was able to go to Taiwan in 2009. A couple of my best highlights, I think we're pulling the gold medal in the IPF. I weighed 218 pounds, deadlifted 782, got a bronze medal with a 523 bench, and then finished fourth all around. And obviously, like I said, making the World Games. My other background, just strength conditioning. It kind of went hand in hand with my powerlifting. Met a lot of great strength coaches along the way, both at the high school, college, and the NFL level. So I was very fortunate to get some internships and volunteer work and just overall experiences. For the last 10 years, I've been a high school and collegiate strength conditioning coach, along with private stuff I do on the side, which is kind of overtaken that for right now, but still involved with the strength conditioning field, like I said, both the high school and college, and then my private side as well.
Cool. So
Yeah.
Lately, you've been kind of focusing on coaching over competing yourself, So you've also brought up several young lifters to the IPF world level. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Like, one question that comes to mind for me is, how do you go about spotting talent?
Yeah, that's a real good question. I was very fortunate to live in Indianapolis, Indiana. I kind of started coaching people along when I was training. I think we all kind of do the same thing. I have good training partners. Well, that coaching side started taking my own competitive side away, and I started focusing more on that. And then, as a coach, get the joy of seeing others come through. One aspect I always want to do is, we hear a lot of people, I've been fortunate to be in a lot of people's corners, from Dave Ricks to, helping Blaine Sumner a little bit, Ray, even Dennis Cornelius, but I kind of want to raise my own. I want to have my own kids come up from the bottom ranks and show that I had, learned from my mistakes, the stuff that I would have changed. We always hear that. What would I change differently? So I started the lifting teams where I was at. It was mostly to kind of help my school, kind of bring up their culture of the overall athletics, because we were very poor. And when I kind of oversaw that, that's where I started seeing kids who really wanted it. And at this level, you really can't create stuff. I'm not a creator. So I just found kids that were really passionate about what they were doing, even if they didn't know what they were doing yet. There's nothing you can replace for that. So obviously I look for talent, athleticism, backgrounds with some of the kids. And I just saw kids that were really involved with it. They were able to catch on quickly, that had a higher level interest. And from there, I just started kind of developing their talents and bringing them up to the powerlifting scene.
So it's kind of like, if they're interested in lifting weights and they care about it, then you give them more, and the talented ones are going to rise from that pool anyway, right? Like, you can't get to that level without caring, so maybe starting there. Is that kind of what I'm hearing?
Yeah, that's a fair interest. And Mike, it usually takes me about a year before I'd even let any of the kids join my lifting team. Chloe Dublin was an exception. I let her come in after about 6 months, but kids get real excited at first. They think they know what hard work, dedication, and everything on the back of all their t-shirts say, but they really don't until it comes down to it. So kids have got to be in front of me for a good, 6 months to a year before I really decide if I want to, take them on and really progress them, and that they have a seat, they have a fit for it.
So what are they doing in that time? That's 6 months to a year.
They're training right in front of me every day. As a high school strength coach, they're with me, 5 to 6 days a week in the weight room. They're doing their basic lifts for their athletic lifts, but they're still learning squat, bench, deadlift. Yes, we have some Olympic lifts in there and so-called athletics lifts. There's no such thing as sports-specific training in the weight room. I'm training athletes. And just once I've seen them develop, take a higher level interest, get excited about it, have that talent to where they're going above and beyond all others. I have optional lifting sessions when the kids come in when I'm in their training. So when I just kind of see the overall package really developing, that's when I kind of start picking them out. And I start them with small local meets, and if they get excited about going to nationals, and if they don't know what that is, we get them there and kind of progresses.
That's cool. So you're not rushing it. That's nice. That I like that approach. The like, let's let you self-select a little bit.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's cool. You mentioned wanting to bring up some kids from scratch, basically, in order to kind of show that you had learned from some of your mistakes. Um, do any of those come to mind? Like what do you do differently with your athletes that you wish you would have done as an athlete yourself?
Learning the more technical side of lifts. I had great coaches coming up, but they're so technical, especially when you get up to a certain level, and your strength's only going to carry you so far. I had to keep pounding on myself because I didn't have bad motor patterns, but I didn't have the ideal technique, and I had to kind of later on go from my way of doing it and the so-called correct way and kind of find a balance where I was using my strength and the best technique I could without relearning the lifts. So, when these kids come in here, my freshmen, Chloe, my three world team athletes, they all started with a PVC pipe, learning lifts, hundreds and hundreds of reps over and over and over again with all the lifts that we did. Um, that was a big thing. So I think the technique is always number one. That's what I pride myself on the most with my lifter, especially in the world scene when, I'm able to have other coaches come over and talk to me about how good their technique looks for such a young age. It's because I hammer that over and over and over again. I don't rush their training. I let them set small PRs every single meet. This was the first year in 3.5 years where my 17-year-old Chloe Dublin, world champion, I actually let her max out or get close to maxes in a meet. I kept bringing her along slowly because you see all these people they're on the scene for a couple of years and all of a sudden they have these small injuries that turn into major ones. And, a lot of times we don't hear from them again.
Yeah.
Or that sometimes they carry these injuries over and over and it kind of affects them later on. So I wasn't going to let that happen. So to answer your question, Mike, technique was the biggest thing that I hammered on them with every single lift that we did. And, until I saw it was sufficient enough to add weight.
Did you have any major moments as an athlete that kind of made that stick out as a lesson to be learned?
Yeah, just when I had small injuries early on, I was training too heavy, training above 90% year round. Being from Cleveland, an Ohio guy, we were heavily influenced by Westside Barbell being out there and the max effort lifts year round. It got me strong. The assistance exercises got me real strong, but not spending enough time on the actual lifts themselves to learn them earlier on. I was too worried about board pressing or working on weaknesses and not actually working on the technique of the lift. But I didn't have I had some good coaches at the time, but not as technical as I am right now.
I see.
So that's one mistake. And one thing I hammer with them is learn the list before we do any of the variations or anything that comes along with lifting.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, so you mentioned Chloe a couple times, and you also said that you've got, I think, 3 athletes
Yep.
that are competing at the IPF level right now.
Yep.
I mean, that's impressive to bring up, lifters that have never touched a barbell and to cultivate 3 lifters at the IPF level. Um, anything like I said, you mentioned Chloe a couple times, but anything you want to mention about the other 2?
Oh yeah, Shelby Miles was my first one that came through. She was the one that was most excited. She didn't know what the USAPL Nationals were, and all these kids came into my gym not even knowing how much a barbell weighed or had to add up any plates on there. And it was something I wanted to create. I didn't want to take credit for somebody else or have a good lifter come in and help them be in their corner. I wanted to create them through my system, just like Mike. I've read about the Bulgarian
Uh-oh.
through. So Shelby Miles is my first one who really paved the way.
For a second there, Jeremy.
Okay.
Can you back up for just a second?
Yep.
Yeah, just pick up where you left off. You kind of cut out for about 5 seconds or so.
No problem.
You were talking about Shelby.
Yeah, so Shelby, she's my first lifter. Got really excited about the USAPL Nationals, and when I brought her up, we didn't make a world team at all the first couple of years, but once she was able to do that, that kind of allowed the spark to some of my other lifters that, hey, this is possible. And once we started setting, just some teenage American records, that was possible. And then we started putting our eyes on world records after that. So Shelby paved the way. Jenica Baldridge was my second lifter. She was my first IPF world record holder. Obviously came in the deadlift. That's something, obviously, I had a lot of pride, and I think that carries over to my kids real well. So Jenica was my second one, overall national champion. And then Chloe's been my last one who's even gotten to learn from them all the way through, but they're all still on, the sub-junior and junior world teams right now.
Got it. Yeah. So that's pretty cool that you're able to cultivate a culture of, achievement and getting to that level too.
Yep.
Do you have to do much with motivation for those lifters? Seeing as, I mean, they're there with you on one hand, but on the other hand, they're still kids, so
Yeah.
do you have to bother with that very much, or are they pretty self-motivated?
No, they're pretty self-motivated. At my level, I was seeing up to 500 kids a day, realistically, probably about a little over 300 athletes. And there's very few that are really motivated, whether it's for their sport that they're training for or it's for powerlifting. And I mean, they quickly lean themselves out, especially kids that thought they wanted to compete in powerlifting and they see how dedicated it is. When they go on vacations, I ask them where they're training at, where their gym is. Those kids have bought in completely, and they wouldn't be allowed to train with you if they hadn't bought in or weren't motivated. They don't need that now. They just need, I'm just there to remind them of the stuff that I've been teaching them the whole time.
Got it. Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
So, with the lifters that you coach in person versus the lifters you coach online, is there a difference in training style between the two?
The lifters I've had right now, like I said, I want to be the first gym to have 3 lifters come out of their gym, to make the U.S. World Team for powerlifting and for the bench press World Team as well. But when I have the people online that I train, I try to really turn into a personal training session. They have to post as many videos as they can for me to see. I pretty much require them, if they're going to be training with me too, that they need to come up as much as they can, whether it's once a month, once every few months, depending on where they're at. And they need to spend the time in the gym. There's so much I can teach through videos and help them out and send information and leave comments, but they really need to get up here as much as they can. And as my lifters, the serious ones, get closer to meet online, they're trying to get in here as much as they can, up to see me for a weekend and, train all weekend for their heavier lifts. So there always is a difference. There's nothing like hands-on lifting, but we're still doing a great job with the online stuff right now, and it's really caught on, and that's getting progressively better. But it's like personal training: as much information as they can send me, as much videos as they can share. Whether it's Skyping it or posting stuff later on, the more I can help them out.
Got it. So you're basically duplicating the system that you're using in person in a online setting, or kind of trying to do the best you can to duplicate those two systems, right?
Exactly. And most of my lifters, Mike, kind of like we do, they're a little bit older, so they've already been squatting, benching, deadlifting. So I try to take my techniques, I look at the way they're doing it, and I try to find the most optimal way. I still break them down with technique, but I look at what they're doing right now. I'm not going to change every lifter to my way. You and I have talked about Liz Craven, to bring her up as an example. She was trying to deadlift the textbook way, and it just wasn't work for her, just like I didn't deadlift the textbook way for me. But I try to find that medium balance way I want them to look and the way they're currently lifting to put them in the best position, obviously, to keep injury free, to maximize their technique. And then from there, I just build upon their strength as I see fit.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So, who would you say? Well, before we get to that, let's talk a little bit more about training and the style of training that you use. So you mentioned that you've got them practicing the competition lifts more often than say you or I did back when we were doing our best imitation of Westside.
Yeah.
So what is their training like?
We just set up that classroom teaching session that you and I did. They can really go in depth. If you guys are interested, check out Mike's RTS classroom. That really, really goes in the depth of how far we do it. But, as they get closer to their meets, we'll talk about the 5 weeks out. That's the most important for the competition lifts. We kind of pick our bread and butter. We have our priority number one, which is the competition lift itself. And then from there, we go down to what's important for their weaknesses. I always do some type of variation. To give an example, if they're doing regular squats, they hit their 5 sets of 5 for the day. We might go down and do high bar close stand squats. If I have some lifters that tend to lean over too much, I'll have some pause squats. We all know squats. The toughest position is coming out of the bottom in good position. So pause squats are great for that. Bench pressing, we've done a lot, and I stole this one from you, Mike. Our 2 position pauses, 1 off the chest, 1 inch or 2 up, and pressing from there. I think the bottom position is for any lifter. If you can't get off your chest, it's just too heavy for you. But working that bottom position and really learn to pause, stay tight, and come through it is going to put you the most optimal. Deadlift, one of our favorites, is pause deadlifts or any type of block deadlift where it's elevated. But we just take the competition lift. We go into our number one priority for that after the main lift, and then we break it down into assistance exercises, hamstring work, back work, whatever I see fit that they need to work on, whether it's, hypertrophy, simple strength training. But I just make a list of priorities, what they need to do individually when they get done with their competition lifts based on what I see, and then I go from there.
Okay. So are you picking those assistance movements kind of, I assume it would have to be kind of chosen based on what you see as their deficiencies as a coach, whether that's a technical breakdown or, some sort of movement deficiency. Does that sound about right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. They're pretty much similar to what all my lifters have, but everyone's still an individual. So I might individualize some stuff, like I said, with pause squats or position work, higher bar close stand squats for quad work. If I see some of my lifters, they need to work on that area since we do a ton of hamstring and posterior training. Back work is a must. I don't care what we do. All my lifters are like me. We train back almost every single day. I believe that's where athletes get injured the most and where a lifter needs to train the most on there. But usually they're individually selectorized, but it kind of depends. I think number one is always the technique. And then two, once they're technically sound, is looking at their strengths and seeing and their weaknesses and identifying those and putting the work in that I think is what they need.
Okay. So you mentioned the priority system and kind of working down a priority list of
Yep.
movements. Is that kind of a weekly priority list? So I guess more to the point of my question would be, are you training the competition lift, once a week or multiple times a week? What are your thoughts on that?
What we have right now is it's usually about four main days, and we usually kind of have we have two bench days, a lighter bench day and a heavier bench day. Squat and deadlift muscles are the same. We kind of have our main squat day. The only time we squat again is right before we deadlift. One thing I learned from a lot of the old lifters, and especially Vince Anello, who was one of my influences growing up, is you always want to be a little tired before you deadlift. Squat and deadlift muscles are the same, so we will do another variation of our competition lift. If you want to call it maybe working up to a medium day, which could be 70 to 80% of what we just hit earlier on in the week. We'll hit that before we deadlift. Work on technique and stuff. Again, I think you can squat a couple times a week. We won't go too heavy on it, but I'll still have them perform their sets and reps, and then we'll move into our competition deadlift. So it's usually, again, a lighter bench day, heavier bench day, a squat main day. Our deadlifts, we always squat again before we start our pulls on there.
Okay. So speaking of Vince Anello, you're one of the few people that I know that I guess a current lifter or coach who's had contact with him, and I know that you go out of your way to seek out the lifters from the generations before us and talk to them and find out like what did they do, why did they do it, and stuff like that. So who would you say are your big influencers in terms of how you view training these days?
It's hard to say my big influence. I've had so many from, like I said, Vince was a big one, obviously, for my deadlift. He gave me a new, kind of a new perspective on what it meant to actually deadlift heavy and what those muscles needed. Vince back in his day with a marathon squat suit was doing walkouts with 1,200 pounds on his back, squatting it down 3 or 4 inches. When we talk about back work, I joked around when I was 17 years old because I could do the whole 250-pound lat stack in my gym, and Vince and I were talking about how important back strength was, and he's doing 380 pounds on there. I thought 3 plates on a bent over row was great, and Vince was doing well, close to 600 pounds on those. So it just gave me a new perspective on what it meant. Instead of just reading some guy's article and it's saying 3 sets of 8 or 5 sets of 5 on this, I got a perspective of what it meant to actually build those lifts up, what it actually meant to train heavy. When Vince and I would talk about negatives, or we would talk about partial movements in a lift, or good mornings to help strengthen their back, or Vince and I were talking. He wasn't the greatest bencher. He still benched 475 pounds raw at 198. He would sit there and tell me about tricep strength. He wouldn't tell me about 3 sets of 8. He would talk about working up to 225 pounds on pretty strict tricep extensions. So I'm getting this perspective of what it actually takes to build those muscles up so they're able to stay healthy. And just want to talk to all of those lifters. I want to know what got them to their level, what kept them healthy, what mistakes did they make, so hopefully I wouldn't make the same ones. So, Vince was one of my ones earlier on, heavily influenced being from Cleveland and Ohio. Louis Simmons was all over the place in Powerlifting USA and Westside Barbell. And, I took many trips down there to learn from those guys. The coaches I had been around too. I was very fortunate. Even Wade Hooper helped me out with one of my weak points, one of my squats. And he was one of the best, I think, middleweight IPF squatters of all time, setting some of the most world records. This weekend, I was just talking with Caleb Williams, who was not only a world champion in the IPF, but also a national champion in weightlifting. He was another big influence on me on just what it took to be, all around and be committed to lifting. We all think we're the most committed and hardcore lifters of all time. And when I spent time and actually trained with Caleb, he gave me a new definition of that too.
So do you want to elaborate on that at all? Like, what was that like?
Train with Caleb or?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I'll give you an example just how dedicated he was. When I was Mike, when we were training for 2005 for the IPF Junior Worlds, they happened to be in the United States, and I ended up training with Caleb for almost 3 weeks. It was just he gave me a whole new perspective. We're sitting there, and during his lunch breaks, he's sitting there downloading Russian texts. We're trying to figure out the Shiko routine before it got publicized in Powerlifting USA, and he's downloading translator pages and getting all this Russian text about how they train and their methodologies. I used to joke around with him. I asked him why he would train his personal training clients on one end of the gym and make him take all these frequent water breaks on the other side of the gym, and he'd be practicing his squat in the mirror before he had to squat later on that day. He had his diet all set. He had that laid out, what he was going to eat every single day at what times. He was tracking his whole diet program. And I was just, it's all the little stuff that he was doing. And it gave me a new perspective why I was a bronze medalist in the world and why he was a world record holder and, a world champion. So just seeing that, and like I said, we all have our own ego, but being around somebody who was like that, guys like Brian Siders too, who were training 6 days a week and having his recovery workouts to help him get better for his regular workouts, where most of us would kind of take the days off and say we need it. It was just kind of giving me a perspective of other stuff that I should be doing if I want to get up to their level.
Another thing about Brian too, I know that especially kind of later on in his career, his kid would be with him in the afternoons and the evenings, and kind of later on in the evening after his kid went to sleep, that was his time to train.
Yep.
So his training sessions were notoriously long too. Like 4-hour sessions were commonplace. Like 4 hours a day, 6 days a week. Like
Yep.
that dude, like mad, and he wouldn't start until like 10 p.m. or something.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, I get what you're saying. About the dedication piece of it. It's a word that gets tossed around a lot, but you see some of these people embody it in a way where you go, I don't know if I could do that, and I think that's how when you're looking at it. If you look at it and you go, that's not really me, then you're looking at someone who's kind of exhibiting that level of dedication. And I think people that can get to that level without it, hey, good for them. But I think you find a lot of people at that level that they kind of show that same sort of dedication. Anyway, I kind of interrupted you a little bit. So you were talking about coaches who've been influential to you, coaches and athletes, I guess, who've been influential to you. Any others that make the list?
Just I was very fortunate, like I said, have a coach start me off with strength conditioning when I was younger. So just getting that on at an early age, it really helped me out. And, I was around a lot of Olympic medalists in wrestling, NCAA champions, All-American, state champions. And I think just being around that mentality, I naturally gravitated towards it, just like when I saw with some of the other guys like Caleb Williams and Brian Siders. When I saw that stuff, I got more hungry. I said, man, what else can I do? Or, hey, I just saw what they did. How can I up them one? I always wanted to up somebody to the next level. So it was a lot of wrestlers. Gary Conjan was my coach who brought me up with a strength conditioning when I was in 6th grade, when it was, old wives' tales, it's going to stunt your growth, and Lord knows everything else that came up. But he built such a tremendous base for me and a work ethic, and it just carried over, and I just wanted more of it.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about mentality and dedication and stuff like that at this point. Do you think that that's a thing that a coach can teach, or is it something that you either have or don't?
I think people have to have those qualities. And I think people gravitate towards them once they have them, because a lot of kids you can show it to. And I can't tell you how many kids have quit my lifting team on their own. They simply just couldn't take the commitment. But the ones that have stayed are the ones, being 3 IPF, world champions on, both the bench press and the actual powerlifting scene. So I think you have to have those qualities. How you develop them, we can talk about nature versus nurture all day, but I just think you have to have them, just like I did, and you got to gravitate towards them. The more they gravitate towards them, the better off it is. But I think a coach has got to do that. So even though I'm not pulling 800 pounds like I used to, I'm still in there training every single day, and I'm making excuses. My kids are around me training all the time. I just can't sit there and just sit on the side and coach them. That drives me nuts. So I'm still in there, no matter what. I watch all their sets. I watch all their reps, give them their stuff. And, we keep training. So that was the mentality, and I guess the culture I have that, I like the most. And that's what I portray on them.
That makes sense. That's cool. So we're kind of getting toward the end of our conversation here, but one thing that I like to ask is what's a topic that you and I disagree on? Because I mention this from time to time, but I think that um, if we kind of talk about the things that we don't see 100% eye to eye on, then there's some potential for learning for both of us and definitely for the people who are listening too. And
Yeah.
just kind of explore a topic in a bit more detail than we otherwise would, if we're just agreeing on everything that comes across the table. So, does anything come to mind that that you and I disagree on as far as training or competing or powerlifting or anything like that?
Well, just like we talked about, seeing my RTS classroom stuff that I've done with you that people can look up and order through your website. But when I go into more detail about it, but I think when my lifters get done with their meets, is we take a break from the lift. So when you asked me earlier about the 5 weeks out and how we train our competition lifts, we actually get away from our competitive lifts. We will still do squats, benches, deadlifts, but we'll do complete different variations what they've used to. I'll give their bodies a little bit of break from those lifts. They tended to beat me up pretty good. I think you got to train the whole body and get them strong at all angles. They all sumo deadlift, they all conventional deadlift. They've got 3 or 4 stances they pull in now that they're technically sufficient, compared to a younger lifter. We go back to flat back bench pressing. We go with their feet up. We let the lower back and the arch, kind of take away where some people, and Mike, you tend to train, with the lifts and down, but we get away from that. We do a lot of assistance work. So when my kids get done, and especially me, we get done with meets, we would not totally take a break from the lifts. We're not going to lose our squats and drop down 100 some pounds or 200 pounds, but we'll go from training 5-6 days a week. I'll only bring them in 3 days a week. We'll do total body. I'll give them some Olympic lifts, some box jumps. I'll give them some other so-called athletic lifts, stuff that they haven't been hitting, and then I will slowly work some stuff back into it. And they're going to get weaker for a little bit. And, they get upset and people are like, well, my lifts are down a little bit. They're not feeling like they used to, but I'm giving their bodies a break. I'm hammering the assistance work as my focus on that time to build up all the small muscle groups, build up some of the stuff that wasn't quite a priority, for those last 5 weeks or as we got closer to a competition. We'll do some strongman training. It's a lot of variations that I'll throw them. Sometimes they have no idea, what I'm going to give them next. A lot of ab training, backs, and a lot of lifters career. So we hammer that stuff. Not that we know it's not a priority, but I put it as a higher priority on my list in the off season. Then as we get closer to a meet, I start working the competition lifts back in, going back to the low bar, adjusting our arches on the bench press, going back to their competition lifts, volume, tons of sets and reps. We won't be hitting any singles or max effort work really in the off season. I might bring them down to triples and doubles. They might have a few lifts where I have them hit some singles on, but I give them 3-week pendulum lays where we'll work up on a whole routine for 3 or 4 weeks. Then I'll drop them back down, do some different stuff that I have available. As we get closer to meet, I start working the competition lifts a little more closely with, like I said, the lower bar, the squat stance, the shoes they normally wear, back to their deadlift actual stances, getting back on so they're learning to bench press twice a week again instead of once or twice. We'll cut down the shoulder work during that time. Benching twice a week takes a ton on your shoulders. If you're trying to do that and heavy shoulders, for me, it just, it was taken away from the bench press. So I think one thing that you and I differentiate on is, I switch their train up completely and get away from some of the lifts, build up the assistance work. They are going to get a little bit weaker. And then I start working those in where I see you like to train people, including yourself, year round with the lifts. I know you do different blocks and cycles on there, but it seems like, you have the technique and stuff that you like to use for, I guess, competition lifts year round.
Yeah. So, I think that's a really good topic to discuss actually, because
Absolutely.
I do it a little bit differently than I used to do it.
Yep.
We used to compete and then pretty much head right back to the gym after
Me
that.
too.
And, my thinking was that, if you were managing the overall training stress, then it's not a problem. And it's not in the short term, but I think that there are things that get missed. And that's just what you're talking about.
Yep.
Just as part of competing, your overall, physical development has to get a little bit one dimensional in order to maximize your results in a powerlifting meet. So yeah, we have done that more lately. We
Mhm.
still don't do it as extended, like extended off seasons and stuff like that. But the reason that we don't do it as extended off seasons is because we're incorporating it a lot more throughout the annual plan.
Mhm.
So one thing that I'm doing these days is that we'll have a lifter train a development cycle. So it'll be a training block, and the length of that training block is going to depend on the lifter and how long they can respond to it.
Mm-hmm.
On average, they tend to be 5-6 weeks or so. And after that's over, we'll have, we call them a pivot cycle or a
Mm-hmm.
pivot block. And that's kind of this off season that we're talking about right now. Um, we'll either train the competition lift or a close variant of the competition lift, but it's a lot lower in volume, definitely lower in intensity. And we cut out a lot of the assistance and supplemental work, make room for general exercises, alternate movement patterns, training the legs in the frontal plane,
Mm-hmm.
or just kind of moving in a different way than what we otherwise would, changing the tempo, trying to work, trying to address a tendon stiffness issue, or whatever. There's tons of different ways of doing a pivot block, but in terms of length, we have kind of ballparked it as a third of the length of the development cycle,
Mm-hmm.
um, just to get us started. So if somebody's like on a 4-week development cycle, we kind of round it off and do a 1-week pivot. If they're on a 6-week development cycle, it'll be like a 2-week pivot. So it ends up being a significant amount of time if you add up all that stuff over the course of a year. And then after a competition will be at least a 2-week pivot for pretty much everybody. Um, just give people plenty of time to come down off of that competition high and um, move back into regular training. But since it's kind of more distributed throughout the annual plan, I don't feel like we need such a concentrated block of it at one point. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean that's definitely something that I've come around on a lot over the
Yeah.
years.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I mean, we still have similar, but we still have, some of our differences that we do on there. But it's
Absolutely.
just stuff how you've changed and how I've changed compared to what, we used to do and the stuff later on. So now, Mike, let me ask you about yours because I see a lot of singles and stuff like that, where you and I differentiate on that. What do you see as, doing singles in the off season, I guess? I know we talked about there's different points for it, but we don't hit a lot of singles. I don't do max effort work. We might work down to it on certain exercises, but after 3 or 4 weeks, I don't like going below 3 or 2 reps or sometimes 4 reps on certain exercises. But what are the singles that you hit, and what does that kind of provide in your
So
annual training?
uh, we'll include for a lot of lifters in a lot of training blocks.
Hmm.
We call them benchmarking sets, and most
Gotcha.
often it's a single at 8 RPE.
Okay.
So it's a single that's slightly heavier than what you would take as an opener in a competition. So it's not hard, but it's hard enough.
Yep.
It's something that's heavy enough for you to push against and actually generate a lot of force, and we can really easily see differences in performance and adjust the weights on those singles over time. And
Gotcha.
it's close enough and specific enough to the competition that we can use it to measure progress. Now we
Okay.
don't always benchmark with singles. It depends a bit on the training strategy, but we do like it. We do use it quite a bit.
Yeah.
Um, Now for the competition lift, I think you get some benefits from it in that you're training the competition lift at a high intensity uh, in the same way that you would do it in a competition. So you're able to get comfortable and maintain your composure under heavier loads.
Hmm.
You see from time to time that some people when they get under heavy weights, they have technical screw ups or they do things differently than they ever have in the gym. So we get all those kind of bugs out of the system. And then when you actually go to the competition, your opener's a bit less than what you've hit for the single every
Hmm.
week. So your confidence going into your opener is extremely high.
Yeah.
And even into your second attempt is really high. Now for your third attempt, you're probably getting nervous for that, but that's when you want to get nervous for a lift.
Yep.
You want to have some of that left over. But we'll even include singles for assistance exercises as well, not supplemental lifts, but for assistance work. And the thinking there is that um, the supplemental work is intended to address something specific, and it's usually a skill based something. So take for example a pin squat. Usually we'll prescribe pin squats for somebody who has like a chest ball pattern. So when they descend down and they hit the bottom, their hips rise uh, before the barbell moves.
Yep.
That's kind of the most common thing that I see going on with raw squatting. And the pin squat punishes that pattern, you know, and rewards you if you do it right. If you maintain your tension and you drive the whole system off the pins at the same time, then you're kind of rewarded for that behavior, and the lift's a bit easier.
Yep.
And if you screw it up, it's harder. So it's training you to do it the right way, you know.
Yep.
So my thought is, well, if it's training you to do it at the right way, then let's turn up the intensity in that skill so that it will be more specific, and you'll feel what it feels like to use heavier weights and do it correctly, you know.
Yep.
Now it's only generally one single, not always, but you know, I would say 80% of our strategies, it'll be like one single and then back off work. Because if you have too many singles, then you really start sacrificing the training volume.
Yep.
But having one single in there kind of lets you get the effect that you need to get, and then move on to something, move on to the rep sets, which get you the rest of the volume that you need. You know, and the intensity that's trained at will depend to a great extent on what the lifter responds best to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I mean, what you're saying about there is setting your benchmarks and stuff. You know, we just do ours. I'm a big volume guy, and I like sets and reps. I don't personally like hitting singles. I think it, beat me up a little bit before. So with us, it's the same thing. We use benchmarks for, triples and stuff like that. I guess I just didn't like pushing a threshold on certain singles, but our benchmarks is we just kind of look at, as long as we're making progress in the list, we're looking back at our old training logs, seeing what we've done in the off season, weakness analysis, like you just talked about, just the position work in the squat. I think that's, we absolutely agree on that, and prescribing it for what most lifters, like you said, raw position, coming up with your hips first and using all back all the way. So we just kind of do it differently amongst our sets and reps, but I think some of the philosophy is still the same, that always trying to address weakness, looking at our annual plan, where our lifters are at, where their competition is, and always, finding that benchmark of where we're at, what we need to do to maybe bring up those weak areas.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Absolutely.
I just want to say as well that singles don't work for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
I've got one lifter, in fact, that comes to mind that for the longest time, his training would be going well, and then it would fizzle when we get close to meet time. And eventually, we kind of are looking at his training log, and we had enough training history established that it's like, man, just every time, it wasn't even just the singles, but every time the intensity got high enough, his results would just tank,
Yep.
and it didn't take long, and it would just, like, just a couple weeks of higher intensity work, and it would really affect him a lot. He would feel beat up, he would feel bad. So it's kind of an exercise in trust what you see, so what we ended up doing is we built a training cycle for him, sent him into a competition. He hadn't trained any heavier than 6 reps at a 9 RPE, which is what, maybe 85% at the most.
Yeah.
So between 80 and 85%. Never did anything heavier than a set of 6, and went into the meet and just smashed some huge PRs, and finally got a lot closer to the numbers that we expected from him, and that was just kind of the first instance of that. And I think he's got a lot more to go from there. He was definitely in better shape than he ever was when we would kind of do the more traditional powerlifter thing of reaching for those higher intensities as you get closer to the meet. And now he's one guy, that's not a description of our entire training system, but
Yeah.
it's pretty important for him that we do it that way, because that's what he responds best to,
Yep.
The singles.
It's funny you mentioned something like that, because I have a junior lifter right now, Jenica Baldridge, my first IPF record holder. She's the same thing. She can't keep that intensity all the way up. So we will work her up, even with her training before meet, up to a certain benchmark. And then we will back her down for almost sets and reps, like you said, not too much of the heavy singles, even though we're training for a 1 rep meet. And she seems to respond way better. So it's kind of like we have a similar case there, that it works for my 2 other IPF world champions. But, for my first record holder and IPF world champion, it's the same thing you said, that the intensity at that high for that many weeks just starts killing them, and we have to find an alternate way. So that's why we drop it down. And sometimes they get worried, like you said, because we were trying an experiment on her. I knew it, and she understood why we were doing it. And she went to the meet and got PRs with weights she had never even done before.
Right. That was probably the hardest part in our scenario too was just that it's nerve wracking, like you're going to go and open with a weight that's far beyond anything that you've attempted in training,
Hmm.
and yeah, that'll make you nervous. And your third attempt is going to be way beyond that as well,
Yeah.
that makes you nervous. And how do you know where you're going to open at? And you've got to use some good judgment and exercise some good sense to make those calls and make those decisions. But um, if that's what the lifter responds best to, then that's the way you've got to go.
Yep.
And I mean, I think I mentioned already that um, we'll even extend that type of individualization into the length of the training block. So I've got a couple lifters that train together that both work with me. One will be on a 5-week training cycle and another will be on a 4-week training cycle. So, I mean, yeah, that's inconvenient because they get out of rhythm.
Yep.
One person is deloading while the other person is peaking, and so yeah, okay, it's inconvenient, but no one cares when it's time to peak on time.
Yep.
When you need to peak when it counts, that's important stuff to know, and it matters to them a lot more than the convenience factor.
Yep. Absolutely. It's the same thing in our gym. Like we're mostly training the same lifts. Someone's got different priorities on their list than some other lifters. Some have different benchmarks where we're at, whether they're going to the same meets or not, that I'm trying to have them hit with certain exercises based on what I've seen. When we get done, we might hit the same lifts together. They might be on variations of the lifts, but we might break off and this person's working on these certain exercises to build up weak points. This person is working on these. This person might stay and do some more volume. I might have them do some back down sets like you mentioned with your guy. But it's still similar, but it is a pain in the butt sometimes, but it's fine about what they respond best to and getting them. I wanted them all on the IPF world team, and, we had to do what we needed to do for that.
Right. I mean, chains can be a pain in the butt to set up, but if you respond really well to them, then maybe you ought to set them up, maybe take the extra few minutes it takes to do what you're supposed to do. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Jeremy, you've been really generous with your time. I appreciate you doing that. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for chatting with us. So for anyone listening, if you want to hear more from Coach Hartman, find out a lot more in depth about the training that he teaches and that he's using to develop athletes at really all levels, I'd really encourage you to check out his classroom. If you go to store.reactivetrainingsystems.com and click on classroom, it'll be really easy to find. You'll find a full lesson list and course description and be able to register and everything like that for his class. It's 10 lessons taught over 3 months. So you're able to get a lot more in depth than we could get in, say, a seminar or something like that, or even really an article series. So he's able to teach in a lot of depth, and we want it to be more than just a video series. So there's a discussion board for questions and homework and things like that. So we really encourage you guys to participate and interact with coaches, get your questions answered and stuff like that. So if you're interested in any of that, I really encourage you to check out Jeremy's class. So thanks a lot, Jeremy, for your time, and thanks everyone for watching. See you guys next time.
Reactive Training Systems.